In this lecture, we're adding some walls, we're adding some collisions so that our player can bump into our walls and bump into the objects, and we're talking about collision. Let's get started. Let's start by clicking on play and figuring out how large we want our play area so that the player has a good challenge. What I'm going to do in my game is have the player start down the bottom left somewhere and then have to go through some obstacles, dodge some things, and then make their way through stuff and get to the very end up there. I think what I've got at the moment is an okay size. If we make it too much bigger, then we have to put too much stuff in it, and we have big open spaces, which is not the sort of game I'm going for. So I think it's okay. Just so you can see, my ground plane is of scale 3.2. I'm just going to make this a nice tidy 3.5. Don't have to do that, but I kind of like tidy numbers if I can type properly. And actually, I always update the Y value on my planes, just so I've got a nice neat 3.5, 3.5, 3.5, but the Y value does nothing because it's a plane. It doesn't actually get any thickness to it. And the next thing we want to do is to have some boundaries so that when the player gets to the edge, they can't just go bloop and fall off the world. At the moment, we don't have the ability to fall off the world or to go into other stuff, but we just want to say to them, hey, you're not allowed to go past there. This is the playing arena. So I'm going to give this to you as a challenge, is to create some walls. Here's the challenge: add some walls around the outside of your play area, and if you like, make them a different color. For bonus points, name them properly and organize them in your hierarchy. That's just for bonus points. I'll show you how to do all of this when you get back from giving it a shot, so see you shortly. Okay, I could just take these things and modify them into walls, but I think I want them in there just to be obstacles in the world. Maybe I need to squash them a little bit so they're not taking up so much of the camera, but I'll just move them out of the way a tiny bit for now. They're all called cube at the moment, which is not so good. I'm going to click on cube and rename it as obstacle, and I'll do the same for these others, just obstacle 2. Doesn't really matter how you name these, but for me, it's just tidying it up. Now for our walls, I could either add a new object or I could duplicate these ones. I'm going to be a little bit lazy and just click on obstacle 3 and hit Control D to duplicate, move to the side. I'll rename this to be wall 1. Actually, let's call it wall for now, and then I'm going to be duplicating it and it will automatically do the numbers. I'll show you that in a moment. You probably discovered that already if you did this as a challenge. And a little bit of scaling, hit R, scale down that away, scale up this away, move into the middle. Okay, so I'm just going to scale and position. I'll speed this up a little bit so you don't have to watch every single finessing of it. And to be clear, it doesn't matter if it goes over the edge or if it goes under the world. It just needs to make sure that it is touching the ground plane and we don't have any gap. Like this here wouldn't be so good because you could fall down in that gap. And likewise, that there probably might be okay, but we don't want to have any gaps like that. We want to have it touching like this. So that's wall. I'm going to Control D to duplicate. I will move that all the way over the other side. That's an easy one. Kind of get that one for free. Control D one more time. Hit E to rotate, rotate, rotate while holding down Control to make it nice and square. W, move, move. Okay, I'll just throw these down nice and quick. Duplicate and move over to the other side. I'm going to click back on my assets folder, materials. Within here, right click, create material. I'll call this blue. It's going to be a dark kind of blue. I'll drag this onto one of my walls just there. And you can see it's changed it to white. That just helps me see it within the scene when I'm changing my color. Make it a darkish blue kind of thing like that. Looks lovely. And once again, I'll just drop the smoothness all the way down so that it doesn't have any shiny on it. Drag that material over my other walls, either in the scene or in my hierarchy. Now, I was also talking about organizing things. Oh, I've got a gap here. Hang on a minute. That's not done so well. Close the gap. There we go. I mentioned organizing. This was one of those bonus point things that I haven't shown you yet, but here we go. I'm going to right click, create empty. That's an empty game object. It has nothing in it. It's got no other components except for just a transform. So I'm going to put that in the world and I'm going to name it environment. And then before I do the next step, I'm going to go over to the transform, right click and reset, just so that this grouping game object that's empty sits right in the middle of the world. Doesn't really matter if it happens to sit over there, but I just like to have them right in the middle. I know exactly where it's located. I'm going to there highlight from all of my obstacles and walls. I'm holding shift, click on all of them, and then drag them on top of environment, which means they are now grouped in a way that environment is the parent and all these objects are the children, and I can just hit the triangle rolly thing and then hide them all in my hierarchy, and that makes my hierarchy more neat and tidy. Now if I click on play, give myself a little bit more game window here, when I run over to these walls, zoom, I go straight through them. Why is that? Well, let's have a conversation about colliders, and I love colliders. They're an absolute fundamental aspect of game development. Click on my player, we'll have a look at our player. You can see here, what does our player have on it as components? It's got a mesh renderer that allows us to see the box or the mesh that's around it. If I turn that on and off, you can see there it is. It also has a BoxCollider. Now I'll just turn off the mesh renderer so we can see the BoxCollider more clearly. You can see this green outline is our collider. And collider is the first step we need in terms of making collision happen. The clue is in the name, it's a collider. However, at least one of the objects that's bumping into each other needs to understand about physics. And the way we have things understand about physics is by adding another component. So let's go click add component. I'm going to search for rigid body. The rigid body is the mass, the body, the substance, if you will, that the physics system understands and knows about. And you can see it's got things like mass and drag and angular drag, and it's got gravity as well. Let me just quickly show you. Now that we've added a rigid body, if I drag this up into the air, click on play, bloop, it drops back down to the world because it has gravity on it. And the reason it stops when it gets to the ground plane, just clicking on the ground plane here, is the ground plane has a collider. And the collider says, oh, the rigid body needs to stop. Thou shalt not pass. Now, I want my game object to sit just a little bit above the ground. I don't want to have gravity on because gravity is going to sort of try to be constantly forcing it into the ground, and then we'll have to deal with friction and other kind of things. So just a little bit off the ground. So the player thinks it's on the ground, but it's not quite on the ground. So we'll turn off gravity by clicking the checkbox. Now when I click on play, it doesn't move up or down at all, which is great. And now that we've added a rigid body, if I go running over to the side of the world, and let me just make my game window a bit bigger, running over, boop, I can't get past it because it's a rigid body trying to bounce into a collider. But we're getting, whoa, all manner of weird nonsense going on here. Why is that? Well, because we're using the physics system is saying, when you bounce back, you probably should bounce up a little bit and to the side a little bit. And oh, by the way, you should be rotating a little bit because of the way that physics is interacting with the object. Undo those things. And we don't want those things. We want our player to stay being cool, calm, collected and not kind of bounce and float off into the distance. And the way we need to do that is by add some constraints. So the rigid body that's on the player, open up constraints, and you can see we've got the option to freeze certain positions and certain rotations. Now, a little micro challenge for you. Why don't you go ahead and see if you can figure out which of those things we need to freeze. Okay, dramatic pause once again for you to have a time to pause the video and figure that out. I'm going to freeze all of the rotation because I don't want any of that sort of stuff going on or any of this sort of stuff going on. That is not needed at all in the game that we're making. So I'm freezing all of the rotation. Now, what position do we want to freeze? Well, obviously, we don't want to freeze X because we need to move on X. And we don't want to freeze Z because we need to move on Z. So therefore, I am going to freeze Y just to stop the ability of going boing and bouncing up into the air. Now, when I click on play and go flying over towards the wall, bouncing into the wall, no bad things can happen. Now, I will point out that you can probably sneak through the gaps in the collision in our objects here because our collision is not perfect. We've kind of got these two things sort of touching each other, and that makes a sort of a gap in our collision. And that's a little bit of the downside of the type of game we're making in a fast and loose, quick way, and that we haven't really set up our colliders in the best way possible. But I don't want to get bogged down in the details for this little project. We're doing something that's pretty good. We're not quite ready yet to ship this to the App Store or put this on Steam. We're learning the principles of how Unity and game development work. Now, if you had an object and you've seen that for some reason didn't have collision on it, so if we were to delete this component, so if I right-click, remove component, it now does not have any collision, and when I go flying over there, whoop, I just run straight through it. That's not what we want. We want to have a collision on it, so I click back on the game object, and I add component collider. And we've got a few types of colliders we can add. Ours happens to be a box-shaped thing, so BoxCollider is just fine, but if it was a capsule type thing, we'd want a CapsuleCollider, and you can see there's a bunch of other colliders we could add as well. I'll add a BoxCollider, and by default, it's going to fit perfectly around the outside of the mesh, which is what we want. If you were looking at that and saying, oh, I kind of want a little bit of a buffer so that the player can't touch right up against the mesh because it looks a little bit weird, then you can go in and edit the collider, either by clicking on the Edit Collider button and then dragging, see the little green dots here on each of the faces? You can drag that face out and extend it a little bit, or I'll just hit undo on that. I can also click back on my Edit Collider button to uncheck that, and I could go onto the size and drag that way, and if I wanted to move it in a particular direction, then I can do that by on center. So I'm changing the size and I'm changing the center. If I have the center back at zeros and the size at 1, 1, 1, then it will fit exactly around the mesh that we've got in there at the moment. And the cool thing is, if I'm selected on this particular game object and I hit R to scale, it will scale the mesh and the collider together, which is pretty neat. There's one more scenario that we're not going to use just yet, but I want to show you for completeness in case you're wondering. There's sometimes in our game where we might say, you know what, I want to create this box so that when the player does pass through it, something happens in the game. I want it to be invisible, so the player doesn't even know it's there. It's just when they walk around the door and they run through this box, something happens. That's called a trigger. And we would need to click the trigger check mark here. Then when my game object, or when my player runs through that, you can say I've run through it over here. It can run through it. It doesn't bump you off the outside of it. It's not a collider anymore. Technically a collider, but we would then call it a trigger because it's acting as a trigger. And we can send information in our code to say, when you pass through this trigger, make nifty things happen in our game. So I just wanted to show you that for completeness because we use triggers a bunch in video games. I'm just going to turn the mesh renderer back on and uncheck is trigger because I want that to be just a regular old wall that we bump into for now. So there we go. That's all for basic collision. I hope you're excited about it as I am, and I will see you in the next lecture.